The winter of 1812 settled over London like a pale shroud, softening the clamour of carriage wheels and muting the chatter of the passing crowd. Yet nothing, not the cold, not the fog, not even the hush of falling snow, could silence the hum of curiosity surrounding Lady Eleanor Harcourt. Her name drifted through drawing-rooms and supper-tables with a blend of admiration and pity, for she was the eldest daughter of a viscount whose fortunes had long since begun their quiet decline. But tonight, in a ballroom gilded by candlelight and crowded with England's most scrutinizing eyes, she was meant to step into the security promised to her, an engagement to the Duke of Ashcombe. It was the moment her family had prayed for, the moment society expected, the moment she had prepared her heart to accept. Calmly, dutifully, without the indulgence of romance, Eleanor moved among the guests with a grace so subtle that only those who studied her closely could see the disciplined composure beneath it. Her figure was modest, her beauty understated, yet her presence carried a serenity that drew the attention of those weary of glittering excess. She had the air of a woman who felt deeply but spoke sparingly, who observed more than she demanded, who bore the weight of expectation with an elegance that belied its heaviness. Tonight, she had allowed herself the smallest stirring of hope, the quiet belief that even a life shaped by duty could contain the promise of tenderness. Across the room stood the Duke of Ashcombe, tall, reserved, and distinguished in a manner that seemed to set him apart even in a sea of nobility. His widowhood had lent him a sombre refinement, grief had carved lines of seriousness into his face, but it also gave him a depth that many found compelling. He was not known for impulsive decisions, nor for careless pursuit. His choice of Eleanor had been spoken of as sensible, respectable, inevitable. The Harcourt family, long burdened by narrowing means, would finally find stability. The Duke, in turn, would gain a wife admired for her discretion and good judgment. Yet as Eleanor approached the Duke with the intention of greeting him, a ripple passed through the crowd, one of those subtle shifts in atmosphere that only the keenest noticed at first. A pair of matrons leaned together, whispering with sharp eyes fixed not on Eleanor, but upon the far side of the ballroom. Young debutantes stifled delicate gasps behind their fans. A footman, trained to impassivity, failed to suppress an involuntary glance toward the same direction. Eleanor followed their line of sight instinctively, and her steady breath thinned as she saw the figure whose arrival had altered the room. Charlotte Harcourt, her younger sister. Charlotte, with her luminous smile and coquettish laugh. Charlotte, whose beauty had for years overshadowed Eleanor's quiet virtues. Charlotte, who moved through any gathering as though every candle existed for the sole purpose of illuminating her. She entered on their mother's arm, appearing as though she had not merely dressed for the evening but had been summoned from a portrait. Alive, vibrant, dazzling. She was everything the Tun celebrated: youth, charm, vivacity. And she was precisely the one woman Eleanor had prayed would not draw attention on this night of all nights. At first, Eleanor dismissed the murmurs as mere admiration for Charlotte's beauty. But admiration alone did not cause sharp glances or sympathetic frowns. Nor did it coax a low, nearly imperceptible whisper from behind her. How bold of her, after what was said. Eleanor turned, her calm expression concealing the sudden tightening of her chest. In her world, whispers were rarely harmless. In her world, any shift in tone could herald the collapse of carefully constructed plans. The Duke, who had been surrounded by admirers moments before, now seemed caught in a peculiar tension. His gaze, usually steady, flickered toward Charlotte in a manner too swift to decipher, yet too deliberate to ignore. Eleanor waited for him to look back at her, to acknowledge her with the familiar, courteous nod he always offered. But instead, he hesitated. A hesitation that spread, moment by moment, into the air between them. Charlotte noticed it immediately. She moved toward him with an effortless glide, her skirts whispering across the polished floor, her eyes luminous with a brightness that seemed almost triumphant. Eleanor watched her sister curtsy with flawless grace, offering the Duke a smile that hovered at the edge of impropriety. And he, this dignified man, this widower so careful with his reputation, returned the smile with a warmth he had never given Eleanor. Not once. Not even in moments when they stood together in quiet conversation. The shift was small, but in Regency society, small shifts could shatter lives. Whispers thickened. Elegant heads bent together. Fans fluttered like startled birds. Eleanor, though standing tall and still, felt the ground beneath her tilt. Her engagement, not yet formally announced but long presumed, was suddenly cast into doubt, not by any official declaration, but by a single exchanged glance in a ballroom where glances were currency and speculation was blood sport. She forced herself to breathe steadily, to walk with composure through the crowd as though nothing had disturbed her. She had learned, from years of living in the shadow of a more radiant sibling, that dignity must never falter in public. But her heart beat unsteadily beneath her stays, each throb echoing the possibility that everything she had been promised tonight could slip through her fingers without a single word being spoken. It was then, while moving through a corridor to collect her bearings, that she noticed a slip of folded paper on the marble floor. Small, elegant, sealed with wax. An object entirely out of place. She bent to retrieve it, meaning only to return it to its owner. But the seal was already cracked, the contents exposed. And she recognized the handwriting instantly. Charlotte's. The signature looped at the bottom of the page confirmed it. But what struck Eleanor more, what stole the breath from her lips, was the name written at the top. The Duke of Ashcombe. The letter was unmistakably intimate. Too intimate. A confession, a plea, a flirtation. She could not yet tell, for she refused to read more than the first line. But even that single line was enough to turn her blood cold. The night that was meant to secure her future had instead unveiled her deepest fear, that love, loyalty, and even sisterhood could be unraveled by a single hidden betrayal. And somewhere behind her, the music continued, bright and oblivious, as though nothing at all had changed. In the days that followed the ill-fated ball, the Harcourt household existed in a hush so taut it felt as though even the walls strained to hear what no one dared say aloud. The letter Eleanor found remained tucked within the drawer of her escritoire, its presence a silent weight pressing against every hour. She had not read more than the opening line, yet that single glimpse had revealed enough to haunt her. Charlotte's handwriting, unmistakably affectionate, addressed to the Duke with a familiarity Eleanor herself had never been granted. She kept the letter not as proof of betrayal, though it was that, painfully so, but as a means to steady herself. Whenever doubt threatened to weaken her resolve, she touched the folded edge, reminding herself that deception did not diminish the worth of the deceived. The Duke's absence from society only intensified speculation. He had not called upon the Harcourts, nor sent word, nor offered any explanation for his sudden withdrawal. His silence was interpreted by some as gentlemanly restraint, by others as damning confirmation that his affections had shifted. Eleanor, accustomed to observing the subtle turns of human behavior, sensed something far more complicated than fickleness. There had been tension in his eyes that night, conflict, hesitation, and a glimmer of something like remorse. But remorse for whom? Remorse for what? The questions circled her constantly. Charlotte, meanwhile, blossomed beneath the attention the rumors brought her. She flitted through their home like a nightingale, singing melodies of feigned innocence while affecting perplexity each time someone mentioned the Duke. "I cannot imagine why people insist on attaching my name to his," she would say with wide, guileless eyes, though the faint upward curl of her smile betrayed her satisfaction. Their mother, oblivious to the subtleties beneath the surface, interpreted Charlotte's popularity as an opportunity and encouraged every invitation, every promenade, every conversation that could strengthen the family's standing, regardless of how it wounded Eleanor. Yet even Charlotte's charm could not quell the steady murmuring that grew around them. A whisper here, a knowing glance there, a widening suspicion that the younger sister had entangled herself with a man already presumed to be engaged to another. It was a scandal waiting to erupt, held in place only by the absence of definitive proof. The Duke's gift to Eleanor, the silver-handled quill, remained on her writing desk, a symbol of the respect she believed he once felt for her. She had treasured it as a sign he recognized her preference for thought over finery. But now, it mocked her, gleaming coldly each time the sun caught its polished surface. Still, she could not bring herself to remove it. Something about the quill reminded her that the Duke, for all his gravity, was a man capable of gentleness. A man she had come to regard not simply as her future husband, but as someone whose presence brought a quiet steadiness she had grown to rely upon. One evening, seeking solace, Eleanor slipped into the winter garden behind their townhouse. The air was crisp, perfumed with the faint sweetness of late-blooming roses sheltered beneath glass. She walked among the pale petals, drawing calm from their fragile persistence. But as she rounded the far corner near the frost-covered fountain, she froze at the sight before her. Charlotte stood beneath the arch of ivy, her hand resting lightly on the Duke's arm. Eleanor's breath faltered. The Duke, who had avoided society, who had avoided her, was here. With Charlotte. She stepped back instinctively, concealed by the glass and the descending dusk. She knew she should leave, should turn away, should protect what was left of her pride. But her feet remained rooted to the ground, drawn by the same desperate hope that had always betrayed her. Charlotte was speaking softly, her voice carrying just enough for Eleanor to catch fragments. "You are too serious, Your Grace. You must allow yourself to feel." Her fingers tightened on his sleeve, a gesture bordering on impropriety. The Duke did not pull away, but neither did he lean into the touch. His face bore an expression Eleanor could not decipher, troubled, torn, and profoundly weary. "We must not be seen together," he murmured. "The situation is already precarious." Precarious. The word sliced through Eleanor with painful clarity. It confirmed everything she feared, and yet, it also hinted at the Duke's discomfort, perhaps even reluctance. Charlotte, however, seemed immune to caution. She stepped closer, tilting her face upward with calculated sweetness. "You worry too much," she whispered. "No one will discover us." Her confidence was chilling. Eleanor stepped back from the glass, unable to watch more. The scene was not damning in action, but in implication. Whatever existed between them, whether affection or manipulation, it was real enough to threaten the very ground Eleanor had built her life upon. She fled the garden quietly, seeking refuge in her chamber. There, she paced before the hearth, trembling with a mixture of humiliation and clarity. The Duke was entangled in something he could not unravel. Whether Charlotte pursued him out of ambition, vanity, or something more baffling, Eleanor could no longer deny her sister's intentions. And she could not ignore that the Duke, for all his reserve, had not severed whatever bound him to Charlotte. The scandal broke the next morning, not with a confrontation, but with an empty explanation. The Duke departed London altogether. His household announced he had left on a private matter of urgency, declining visitors and correspondents alike. The Ton, deprived of answers, filled the void with conjecture, and their conjecture soon hardened into conviction. The Duke was distancing himself from Eleanor. The Harcourt's drawing-room filled with strained reassurances, hollow encouragements, and forced optimism. But no amount of polite fiction could erase the truth, a truth Eleanor faced alone in the quiet hours before dawn. Her hands shook as she held the Duke's quill over the fire, the silver catching the flicker of flames. She released it, intending to watch it vanish, to burn away the last fragile thread of hope. But the quill did not surrender to the fire. It slipped through the grate, landing among the embers without melting, without blackening, without yielding. It glowed faintly, stubbornly, as though refusing to be destroyed. Eleanor stared at it, torn between despair and an unwilling spark of defiance. Perhaps her story was not yet finished. Perhaps all had not been stripped from her. But whether the future held ruin or revelation, she knew only one thing for certain: she would no longer meet it with silent resignation. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and she would have to learn how to stand upon it once more. And somewhere beyond her window, the faint echo of carriage wheels hinted that change, swift and unforgiving, was already on its way. The months that followed the Duke's abrupt departure unfolded with an eerie quiet, as though the city itself were hesitant to disturb the remnants of Eleanor's shaken world. Winter softened into a pale, reluctant spring, and London's fashionable circles, ever hungry for novelty, gradually shifted their whispers toward fresher scandals. Yet the Harcourt name lingered in conversation like a fading perfume, its sweetness tinged with melancholy. Eleanor found herself neither shunned nor welcomed, inhabiting a liminal space reserved for those caught between innocence and humiliation. What she endured in silence, though silence had long since ceased to protect her. She had changed in ways subtle but unmistakable. Her manner, once composed out of duty, now carried a steadiness forged from endurance. The fragility that had once made her susceptible to hope had been replaced by a quiet strength that startled even those closest to her. She walked the streets of Mayfair with a calm that seemed unshakable, as though heartbreak had become a veil through which she viewed the world with clearer sight. Charlotte, meanwhile, vanished from London's social scene with alarming swiftness. She left behind a trail of half-truths and inconsistencies, whispers that she had gone to the countryside for her health, then whispers that she had traveled abroad with friends, and finally whispers so salacious that even the boldest society gossips lowered their voices when repeating them. Eleanor, for all her wounds, felt neither triumph nor bitterness at her sister's absence. What she felt was a heaviness, a knowledge that Charlotte's choices were not merely reckless but ruinous. And ruin, once begun, seldom halted its descent. It was on a rain-soaked afternoon in early May, when the season's first blooms drooped beneath the weight of silver droplets, that Eleanor encountered the Duke once more. She had ventured to Hatchard's bookshop seeking solace in the company of old volumes. The steady patter of rain against the windows had lulled her into a rare moment of peace when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the unmistakable figure of the man she once thought would anchor her future. The Duke entered with the bearing of someone carrying an invisible burden. His coat was darkened by rain, his expression sharpened by exhaustion. He paused when he saw her, as though struck by something between recognition and remorse. "Lady Eleanor," he said softly, inclining his head. She returned the gesture with dignified restraint. "Your Grace." The silence that followed trembled with unspoken history. Then, with a look that suggested he had rehearsed this moment countless times, he asked if she would allow him a private conversation. Against her better judgment, she agreed. They retreated to a quiet alcove at the far end of the shop, sheltered by towering shelves of leather-bound histories that seemed to bear witness to their fragile exchange. He spoke first, his voice low, steady, yet shadowed by guilt. "I have wronged you, my lady, more deeply than I can ever hope to atone for." Eleanor held herself with the poise she had spent months cultivating. "I do not require your atonement, Your Grace. I only require the truth." He inhaled sharply, as though bracing himself. "Charlotte sought me out long before rumors began. She wrote to me repeatedly, using every art of persuasion. I believed it harmless at first, a young lady's admiration. But I underestimated her determination. When she suggested we meet privately, I should have refused. Instead, I allowed myself to be flattered. I allowed myself to be guided." His voice faltered. "And when matters escalated, I did not act swiftly enough to protect you." The ache Eleanor thought she had buried returned, soft yet sharp. "Did you love her?" she asked, not out of jealousy, but out of the need to understand the shape of her own suffering. "No," he answered without hesitation. "I did not love her. I pitied her. And I made the unforgivable mistake of confusing her desperation for affection." He rubbed his brow, weary. "When she fled London, it was not with me. She left me as she sought me, suddenly, recklessly, without warning. I learned weeks later she had attached herself to a foreign nobleman of dubious repute." Eleanor's breath stilled. The revelation was not surprising, yet its confirmation carried the weight of finality. Charlotte had chosen ambition over loyalty, leaving wreckage in her wake. The Duke continued with steady desperation. "I returned to London not to repair my reputation, which is beyond salvage, but to speak to you. I will not burden you with hope where none is deserved. Yet I cannot let the past stand unaddressed. You were wronged by my weakness. I intend to face whatever judgment you will give." Eleanor studied him, noting the changes hardship had etched across his features. The man before her was not the controlled, dignified Duke she once admired, but a man humbled by consequence. And though he stood there with the weight of regret pressing upon him, she felt no triumph, only the faint stirrings of something akin to compassion. "You owe me honesty, not penitence," she said quietly. I cannot absolve you, nor do I seek to. What I can offer is the truth in return. Her hands clasped before her, steady. I once believed our engagement, though unspoken, would become a foundation for something meaningful. Not passion, perhaps, but mutual respect. When you withdrew, you did not only wound my pride. You wounded the part of me that trusted your judgment. He bowed his head. And I will bear that wound all my life. The sincerity in his voice tugged at her. But Eleanor had learned too well the danger of surrendering to fragile promises. Your Grace, she said softly, what you seek from me now, understanding, forgiveness, these are not gifts offered lightly. I cannot decide in a single conversation what took months to fracture. He met her gaze with solemn gratitude. I ask for time. Nothing more. She nodded, granting him the smallest, most cautious mercy. Their conversation ended with a silence that felt less like rupture and more like the first hesitant stitch in a long-mended seam. As they parted beneath the shop's awning, the rain eased, thinning into a gentle mist that blurred the edges of the city. The Duke bowed once more, his expression earnest and unguarded. Whatever the future holds, he said, I will honor the truth we have spoken today. Eleanor watched him disappear into the softened light, her heart neither restored nor broken, simply awake. And for the first time since her world unraveled, she felt the faint stir of possibility, fragile as a spring bud yet resilient enough to face the uncertain days ahead.